Single-cell life seems to have appeared quickly after the formation of the Earth and has co-evolved with our planet ever since. Biologists understand that life requires trace elements, many of which are metals, to perform crucial chemical reactions. Recent studies show that geological activity, such as plate tectonics, has a key role in controlling when and which metals are available during life. We don't yet know how life appeared or how it will thrive in the extreme conditions of the early Earth, but tackling these questions is essential to our understanding of which exoplanets, that is planets orbiting other stars, could host the conditions and ingredients for life. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Steele. I am the Deputy Director at the Carl Sagan Center here at the SETI Institute, and I would like to welcome you all to the April edition of SETI Talks. These talks are offered free to anyone in the world, and please do let us know in the chat where in the world or beyond you are tuning in from. And as with all previous talks, this one will be available to watch on our YouTube channel afterwards. A reminder also that the SETI Institute is a non-profit organization, and we do rely heavily on public donations. Last week, we held a special Giving Day event with one of the goals to increase support for the SETI Talks series. And here we have a list of those donors for that. And thank you very much, everybody on this list, everyone from Dennis, Patrick, Virginia, Edgar, Sheila, and all of you for making donations to help make SETI Talks work. So thank you all for that. If you'd like to sponsor a future SETI Talk, do contact us at development@seti.org. Okay, but we're here to talk about metals and to discuss the role of metals in the evolution of life here on Earth and on exoplanets. We've invited two scientists from the University of Naples, Federico II in Italy, Donato Giovanelli, a microbial ecologist and professor who works on the coevolution of life and the planet, and Giovanni Covoni, astrophysicist and professor of astrophysics, whose research focuses on exoplanets and exobiology. And to moderate the discussion, we have Molly Bentley, the executive producer of the SETI Institute's Big Picture Science radio show. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Molly. And you're muted, Molly.
This will be much more effective, unmuted. Simon, thank you so much. And good morning to everybody in this part of the world, and buona serata to Donato and Giovanni as they get on with their evening. This discussion is titled Got Metal. And as Simon said, we're going to discuss the trace metals that may be necessary for life to emerge, but we want to start by defining the terms. So we think of gold and silver as precious metals. I'm working up to a question to Donato and Giovanni, and you can decide who answers this first. But we could argue that some metals are more precious because they allow us to function. Iron, calcium, potassium, magnesium. Donato and Giovanni, are these the same metals that you think are necessary for life to emerge?
Hi, Molly. Good evening, everyone. Hi, Giovanni.
Hi.
I think that's actually a great question, and I think it's actually a two-part question, because on one side, we know these metals are very important for life. We know that me, you, Giovanni, everybody listening to us, most animals on this planet, for example, they can breathe oxygen because we use copper. We have a copper-dependent enzyme that allows us to breathe oxygen. So without copper, we would not be breathing oxygen. Similarly, when we talk about a lot of the function that microbes carry out on this planet, like nitrogen fixation, converting atmospheric N2 into usable ammonia, that's carried out with enzymes that use molybdenum or use vanadium as metal center. So we know absolutely that these metals are more precious than gold and silver, because without them, biology will not function and exist. Whether these metals were important for the emergence of life is one of the big questions we're trying to address. I would tend to say yes, but I'm biased on the thing. I would tend to say that whatever life is using today was probably already used during its emergence. I know this is a popular view among a lot of my colleagues working on the origin of life, but I think this is one of the questions we need to work as a community toward.
Okay, and Giovanni, those metals that I listed that are essential for human biology, iron and calcium and potassium and so forth, are those some of the metals that you are now thinking may have been necessary for life to begin? Some of those same metals that we're familiar with?
Yeah, as an astronomer, I was familiar with the idea that metals are essential for the formation of rocky planets. Rocky planets, as far as we know today, are the unique cosmic environments that allow life to form and to evolve. And then, since me and Donato met at our university and started to collaborate together, I start to consider, together with Donato, the necessity of metals also for life. This is an idea which is not very wide common in the astronomical community. If you participate to an astronomical conference, you hear about metals, which is everything heavier than helium, very generically. And astronomers are very, used to discuss metals or cosmic evolution for evolution of stars, of planets, but they don't use them to define the so-called habitable zone.
Right.
So in astronomy, you meet this idea, this magic idea of the habitable zone. And usually we define that just with water, the presence of liquid water on the surface of planet.
You know what, I'm going to jump in and ask you to hold that thought, because you're bringing up something that's very interesting, which is how we determine whether or not a planet is habitable. And we are headed there, but I just want to define the terms, because when we think of metals, what's so interesting about this topic is we think of metals as being inert, right? We think of them as the opposite of biology, which is moving and breathing. So we just want to define which metals we're talking about here, if it's the ones we're familiar with. Can you name some of these trace elements that we think may have been essential in the origin of life? What are two of them?
Well, iron is the big one.
Iron.
And then I will mention nickel, cobalt, copper, molybdenum, vanadium. The point is that we actually don't know the extent of metal usage by life today on Earth. We still have doubt about the use of, for example, in the last 10 years, we discovered enzymes, they use lanthanides, lanthanum, cerium, niobium as metal centers. So we don't have a good grasp on what are the metal used by life today on Earth. I would say it's pretty broad. So manganese, magnesium, the list is long. I think there's a big division we can make between the elements that are used for redox chemistry. So that's why when some metal become important, because they can easily exchange electrons, versus ions that are used for their shape or their charge, but they're not necessarily involved in exchanging electrons. One big example would be the difference between iron and calcium. Calcium is very important in the human body in biology, but is used as an ion to exchange charge around, but is not involved in redox reaction. Iron, on the other side, can be iron +2, iron +3, can give and get electron very easily as a metal. We know metal are good conductor because they can exchange electrons fairly easily, and for this reason has a very different role in biology. So I think there's a difference in the way we use what we consider true metal, what we consider also as a society metal. I know the definition is very different in the astrophysics community, for example. Giovanni knows very well, but I can mention a few, but we have not a good grasp on what they are.
Okay, but that gives us an idea that these are metals that we're familiar with. Some of these names, we have some of them inside of us. We understand that, for example, metals, we have to get the balance right. Too much iron can make us sick, and also the exposure to lead can do the same. And as Giovanni said, that some of these metals are certainly essential in astrophysical events and phenomena. Now, just another question about terms before we get to how this might work with biology and some of these big questions. Would the two of you like us to be saying metal or element or trace element? And I understand the term biometal is a new word. Is that right, Giovanni? Biometal?
Yeah. Maybe it is a question more appropriate for Donato, but since as an astronomer, we used to be very naive in chemistry. since we call metals everything which is, let's say, as I said before, heavier than helium. Now, probably it's the right time to start to change some convention, some terminology within the astronomical community, especially if you want to collaborate with people from the chemistry department or biology department in order to advance together in this very fascinating field, which is astrobiology. So yeah, and so this is, I like this work we are doing now, because it's forcing me to go back to the blackboard, to read again, to study again, something that I almost forgot 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, and in fact, you could go to the blackboard that's behind Donato right now, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah,
perhaps
we used
the
to go
blackboard
to
you're
work.
talking about.
We spend a lot of time there together, actually.
Indeed. I know it very well, that blackboard.
Molly, I think
Okay.
you touched on an interesting example there, because you mentioned lead. Now, lead has a toxic effect on biology, but is not
Right.
used by biology in any way. When it's incorporated in bones, for example, is by mistake. It's poisoning. So we use the term biometal together with Giovanni and some other collaborator to define those elements, generally first row transition metal, but not only, that are actually used and necessary for biology. So lead will not be considered a biometal. It's a metal in every way we mean it in society and in or geology and things like that. But for example, copper, nickel, cobalt are biometals because are metal that have a very specific biological function. So this is, we're trying to draw these lines to better define groups of elements that we're interested in. But these are very much working definition we use.
Let's talk in a moment about the role that some of these metals may have had, these biometals, in what their specific functions would have been. But let me make sure I understand what the idea is here, that we know that metals are important in biology, but you're suggesting that they may have been necessary for life to emerge. Now, we're not sure about that, but what makes you think, and this is a new idea, this is a surprising connection, actually, and that's why we're here today. What is the evidence, or what drew you to this idea that there may be a connection between these biometals and the emergence of life? Not life once it's established, but for life to emerge.
I think there are multiple points that draw me to this conclusion. And the first one is that we know that life, whichever form, whatever metabolism, needs thermodynamic disequilibria to work. We need to draw energy as life form. We need to draw energy from something. And usually that's a chemical disequilibria we're using. And life, in essence, is electric, meaning that our entire job is shuffling electron around. Literally electric. It's not a figure of speech, you know, I mean literally electric. All we do is shuffling electron between different molecular species. But in order to do this, all life uses metal. All the redox reaction, or the majority, there are few exceptions of the redox reaction involved in metabolism, are mediated by metals because they're such good conductor. They're so good at transitioning between states, redox state, that without metal, we could not imagine tapping into a different form of energy, from light for photosynthesis, to hydrogen, to oxygen, to nitrate, to all the elements that are used by life. So if we think that the thermodynamic requirement of life are universal and that have been necessary for the emergence of life, you know, it's very popular, the theory about the emergence of life in deep sea hydrothermal vents, for example, because they provide a thermodynamic disequilibrium. At the same time, biology is using metal to access that thermodynamic disequilibrium. So metal, they have to play a role there if you want to tap into this equilibrium.
Okay, so just to be clear, so your hypothesis that metals were important for the emergence of life, and I'm just emphasizing that, is because how it is drawn from how the essential role they play in the functioning of biology. But we don't really know how life began. It's still a mystery. We don't really know exactly what happened. So we can just assume that metals had played a role, or maybe I can say, how could we ever prove or strengthen this argument that these metals played a role in its emergence if we don't really know how life began on this planet?
I don't think we will ever know how life began on this planet. I think we will find emergence of life. In the same way we found ways to do abiotic synthesis of amino acid in many different ways. I think one day we will find a way to jumpstart life. We're never going to know if that's the way life started on this planet, but we're going to show, I'm positive that we're going to solve the mystery of possible origins of life. I'm not sure we're going to quite know what happened on this planet short of a time machine. That said,
well, do you think that we'll invent a time machine?
oh, well, no, I'm not sure.
No?
I don't know.
Okay,
Beyond,
okay, that's another discussion. Okay, but
That's
without
another
that,
discussion.
without
Beyond
that,
my
we probably can't
expertise.
answer this question.
I'm
Okay,
pretty sure we're going to solve the origins of life, multiple
Okay.
possible origins. What I think is that if you look at very basic, very simple metabolism, and that we think were important early on during the evolution and the emergence of life, redox chemistry is always there. And it's always a step-by-step chemistry. One of my students was helping me to develop, I was trying to explain this concept of why metals to exchange electrons. And at the end of a very long, very complicated explanation I was giving, my student said, so it's like you want to transfer an egg from one side of the room to the other. You have the option of throwing the egg across the room, which will be dumping electron from hydrogen to oxygen is an explosion. You can burn them together, or you can gently pass them along the room. And the metals, what they do in biology is they gently pass electron along long chains without avoid being energetic jumps. So if you think about this, whatever way you want to envision life started, pick your favorite metabolism. You like photosynthesis, you like methanogenesis. You need to do this step in a stepwise fashion, whatever redox chemistry you're doing. So
let's, of course, it depends on whether or not that egg is boiled or whether it's raw, because different things will happen depending. I want to come back and get a clear definition of what redox chemistry is for people who are not chemists. It's a good reminder, but I'll come back to in just a moment, Donato. Giovanni, I know that when we spoke prior to this discussion, you were learning and you said to me, you were learning some pretty interesting things working with Donato. I'm going to put you on the spot here. What kind of things were you learning that were new and interesting? Is it somewhat what he's sharing with us now, or something else?
Yeah, absolutely. This last example was very important for me in understanding the role of metals in electron transfer. My interest in astrobiology began while studying photosynthesis, oxygenic photosynthesis. I was interested in understanding what are the astrophysical conditions that allow oxygenic photosynthesis to be efficient as it is efficient on the Earth. But from a very naive point of view, I was considering just the global chemical reaction. Now, working on metals together, on the connection between metals and life together with Donato, I am understanding how much important is the role of metals in each step of a global chemical reaction. And this is not, this was usually something that in our toy model of physicists was completely forgotten, completely neglected. So this is one first point that was completely new for me until, let's say, some time ago. And
so it was a surprising connection for you, or it was a rediscovered connection?
Yes, surprising. I think it is surprising for most of my colleagues in my field, in astrophysics.
I have to say, surprising also in biology is fairly new. We know metals are important in biology, but thinking they might have had a much deeper role in controlling what type of metabolism was available, what type of life might emerge, or thinking that they might have a role in thinking about extraterrestrial life, that's quite new also in biology.
Even the definition of
very important.
Yeah, even the definition of biometals is not completely a closed one today. If you ask us what is the list of your biometals, we can maybe forget something, or maybe something will come up next years.
So this is still an area that is open to discovery, and it's really science in action, which is the best kind of science. Donato, I wonder if you could give us a really accessible definition of redox chemistry. Remind us. We should say remind us, because we all remember. We just need a refresher.
Well, let's make it as simple as possible. Or as simple as I can make it, is a chemical reaction in which one or more of the involved species is losing or acquiring electrons.
Okay.
And that's very important because I think if you ask biologists what's the greatest invention of biology, evolutionarily speaking, what's the greatest invention, people will come up with all sorts of answers. The membrane, because you can enclose a system and create an inside versus an outside. Some people will tell you the brain is the greatest invention of biology, or the eye. Some people will say social interaction. It's the greatest. We come as evolution.
Or consciousness, perhaps.
Consciousness, yes, exactly. There are many answers to this. For me, one of my mentors once told me that, yes, it is the membrane, the greatest invention, but it's not because it makes an outside from the inside. It's just because if you get a redox reaction and you have a membrane, and you invent a way to divide electron and protons during your reaction, suddenly you can make work. Alessandro Volta, with his battery, he just invented a way to use redox reaction, having electron flow around the circuit to do work. And biology does exactly the same. You have electron going that way, proton another, and you can do work. So redox is important because it allows you to make chemical work.
And can we use work and energy interchangeably, just in this definition? You're creating energy.
Yes.
Okay.
It allows you to use energy to do something useful rather than waste it in heat or dissipation or something that is not controlled.
Okay. And you said something else that was interesting. And of course, if anyone really wants to get an image of this, they can go home and throw eggs at each other back and forth and get a sense of those electrons moving back and forth. I would say boil them first, because otherwise you're going to have a mess. But you said something very intriguing, which is, you said many things intriguing, but that this may determine the kind of life that emerges. And I mean, are you thinking kind of life as in DNA versus RNA life, or do you mean kind of species that ultimately emerge through evolution? What do you mean by kind of life?
Well, I tend to think about kind of life in terms of kind of metabolism, meaning what elements they can use in the environment. So Giovanni was mentioning oxygenic photosynthesis, and this is very important on today's Earth. It's one of the dominant processes on the surface, but 2.4 billion years ago, there was no photosynthesis to be seen anywhere. There was no oxygen. And while a lot of the astrophysics and astrobiology community is interested in oxygen in exoplanets as a biosignature, well, oxygenic photosynthesis is just one of many types of photosynthesis, and in just a narrow subset of all the type of metabolism available. So when I was referring to type of life, I use that as a short for type of metabolism. One metal is present may influence what type of metabolism you can use. In that sense, more than species or DNA versus RNA.
Yes, and you're really getting at that conundrum faced by the astrobiological community, that the only life we know is life on this planet. We have to look for life as we know it, but we also need to be looking for life as we don't know it. Both of those things have to be happening at the same time. Giovanni, okay, this is a test for you. Can you take us back to the early Earth? Donato was referring to that time. Can you give us a picture? Because this was a pretty hostile or challenging environment, we should say. Can you create an image in our mind what the early Earth looked like? Because what we want to explore are some of those geologic processes at that time, which might have, given up some of this, produced some of these metals. But what would the early Earth look like? Was it a place you would have wanted to pitch your camping tent?
Well, probably you could not even physically put a camping tent that time. One surprise that came out of astrophysical research in the last decade is that the Earth and the other planet in the solar system formed very early and very suddenly, just in a few million years. So you started from these giant molecular clouds made mostly of hydrogen, helium, and all the other heavy elements, and also metals. So iron, for instance. And then you have this collapsing cloud rotating with sun forming the center. And then a few million years while the sun is still forming, you have this dust and these fragments of material coalescing together and step by step, growing sides from sides of the dust up to rocks, mountains, until planetesimals, we call them. So you should imagine an environment around the sun, a very chaotic one, with thousand rocky objects like the moon or Mars collapsing and merging together. And so this is the picture that we have now of how the Earth formed. So you have this merger of planetesimal forming our planet. And then we had this dramatic but very important event in which a planet like Mars probably crashed with the Earth to form the Moon from this not yet solid, completely formed Earth system or Earth planet. So the other surprising thing is that we find evidence for life as soon as our planet cooled down. It was very hot because of the internal heat. There are radioactive decay, which kept our planet very, very hot for first million years. But as soon as the temperature went down and we could find evidence of water on Earth, we find evidence for life. So
that fantastic description that you've just given, and I understand that I know that you're encumbered because you have to hold your microphone and you want to gesture to,
like
to
Italians
describe.
do all the time.
You did a great job with one hand gesturing there. But what was key about that description, I think, is all the metals that were there in the formation of the planet. So now we have a planet that the metals are there, life is emerging. Could one of you describe, please, how those first cells might have taken up some of these metals? I know that we weren't there, we don't know, but do we have any idea how they first would have had access to these metals and started to, of course, they'd be in trace elements, and started to take them up and utilize them? How would that have happened?
One of the interesting things about studying metals in biology is that if you Google for metal cofactor in proteins or metal cofactor in enzymes, you'll see this structure emerging. Or for example, what we call iron sulfur cluster, which are a cubic-like structure where iron and sulfur are alternating at the corner of multiple cubes. The structure there is virtually identical to the mineral pyrite, which is an iron sulfur mineral. And there are many instances in which we look at the biological cofactor, and the structure of the cofactor is almost identical to a mineral, natural occurring minerals. So one of the main proposals there is that biology is just appropriated what the geology was actually already doing. So there were simple crystal and simple minerals that emerged naturally because of physical and chemical reaction that biology was originally using extracellularly to transfer electron and then later on incorporated within the cell. The use of iron sulfur cluster, graphite with respect to some of the cobalt substituted or nickel substituted cofactor we have in biology. So there's actually some very interesting paper on the parallel talking about, one of them is called the rocky roots of the origin of life. Talking about this parallel between the striking similarity between metal cofactor in biology and natural occurring minerals. I think, Molly, you touched on a thing a second ago, if I can circle back, there. I think we've been discussing with Giovanni many, many times, which is we have only one instance of Earth, only one. And we're trying to understand what properties are general enough that we expect them to be somewhere else, to be important in the origin of life and to be present outside our planet somewhere else in the cosmos. And we've been discussing this with Giovanni. We're not the only one. I'm sure a lot of our colleagues discuss about the chance and necessity of the origin of life or the presence of life in the cosmos. And what I'm actually proposing with my work on metal and together with Giovanni is that if we think that there are some very general properties of life that might be general enough to be universal, like physics is universal, chemistry is universal. And we think the necessity of energy is one of them, which is a very basic need, the necessity for a thermodynamic disequilibrium. Then if we know life on Earth needs metal to access it, we think that that might be a general enough property to be important at the origin and presence somewhere else. So what we're trying to say is that it's not the specific metal that will make the difference, it's the necessity for metal to carry out the reaction. We're trying to generalize this to help us in our search of life in the universe and help us in thinking about the origin of life.
Beautiful. And we'll find out more about how you're actually looking for extraterrestrial life, given these new discoveries. Giovanni, it's interesting, isn't it, to hear about this intersection between biology and geology. And we think of them maybe as separate developments, that the Earth went through these geologic processes, and then on top of the Earth, or in the early Earth, you had these biological processes. But what we're learning more, and which Donato explained so beautifully, is that they're intertwined. And in fact, even geology might have been providing the lead for the formation of those early cells and early biology.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the physics of our planet, the physics of the atmosphere are not separated from the evolution of life and formation of the evolution of life. For instance, most of the first example I can think of is just the composition of our atmosphere. Molecular oxygen is not coming from the rocks, from the geology. It's something which has been brought by life on Earth. We should not think life as something that happens randomly on a planet, but it's a unique system in which life starts, life adapts the planet, the environment that finds for its even survival. I mean, when oxygen came into the Earth, it was a poison gas for most of the life at that time. Oxygen is a very active gas. But then it's essential now for complex life, for multicellular life that as we know here on Earth. Of course, we don't know if it is the evolution of the system, biological and geological and physical system of Earth and life is unique or it's universal, because we only know one instance of life as we know it here on Earth. Actually, we only know one rocky planet around a sun-like star.
Yeah.
We know about many rocky planets around other kind of stars, but in the habitable zone, but we still have to find, as astronomers, rocky planets in the habitable zone of sun-like stars.
And now you've moved us into the big question, because we're very interested in life on this planet, but we are here to also talk aliens. And you've named some of the key terms in looking for life off this planet: rocky planet, habitable zone. And let's discuss that, but I'll throw out first just a big question, big picture question. How might this discovery of this connection between metals and biology to ignite life on Earth help us find alien life, help us find life off Earth? If you can answer that generally, then we'll look at some of the specifics.
One problem as astronomers that we have is that we love telescopes, but we don't have many telescopes. And we are searching for rocky planets. We are starting to find them. We will find them in 5 years, I guess, I bet. Rocky planets around sun-like stars in the temperate zone where you could have liquid water. And probably we will have tens of targets to observe, to search for biosignatures.
And just to be clear, Giovanni, you're looking for rocky planets because rocky planets would have produced the geology on this planet that produced these metals. So we want the rocky planets because Earth is a rocky planet, and that's how we're extrapolating. Okay.
Where you find those metals that are useful, essential for the metabolism on Earth. Rocky planets don't produce metals; they come up with metals to be used by life. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Metals. It happens. You already find them in the molecular clouds, produced by previous older generational stars, by supernovae, by other giant stars, or
that was the big discovery for me working with Giovanni. I didn't know that different stars produce different metals, and you need a certain type of stars to make the biometals. Otherwise, you're not going to find them. That was a big one for me.
Donato had to go to blackboard as well as just like me.
We would have liked to have been there when you two were having a glass of wine or coffee or whatever, and each sharing the highlights from the other's discipline and the moments of discovery and delight for both of you. That would have been fun to be a fly on the wall and listen to that conversation. Okay, and maybe I just took us off. I'm going to bring us back here. So when you go looking for using, go ahead.
So we were asking what it is bringing as a new element for the search for life.
Yes.
Well, now we think that by studying the Earth, life on Earth, we are understanding that metals are necessary for life. So if we want, as astronomers, to rank the highest probability targets where we could find life, we should put in the equation not just liquid water, not only a star which is long and stable enough to allow a formation evolution of life, but we should put into the equation also the presence of metals, of biometals. We have too little telescope time to observe all the nice planets that we are going to find. We have to select the few the best candidates. And in order to rank these candidates, now we understand that we should consider also metals. In this way, we can rank the best candidates to use James Webb Space Telescope, for instance, or next mission, space missions for spectroscopy of exoatmosphere. And so in order to efficiently use our telescope time, we should rank the targets. And metals, iron content, for instance, will be essential.
It's like adding another layer of understanding on top.
Right.
More nuanced layer.
So Donato, I want to ask you about how we might identify those key planets or moons, but I do want to invite our audience to ask questions, which you can do using the chat function there, and we will turn to audience questions in a little under 10 minutes or so, maybe about 6 minutes or so. But so Donato, how do you go about that? Giovanni gave us an idea that you use a telescope, you use a powerful telescope like the James Webb. You look at these ideal candidates, but are then you looking for the geological processes? Are you looking for the planets that are rocky that may have these tectonic processes? Or are you trying to find the metals themselves in the way that we detect chemicals using spectroscopy? So we're able to tell whether or not the atmosphere of a planet may have traces of methane. Okay, that's something that we can do. So are you looking for traces of the metals themselves, or are you just looking for the conditions under which they might have been captured or formed?
I think there are multiple layers then in what you were ranking. And Giovanni is a much more of an expert than me on the spectroscopy of planet. But I think, generally speaking, and Giovanni, please correct me if I'm wrong, we think about these in terms of the big surprise for me was discovering that these metals are not uniformly distributed throughout the universe. So there are regions of the galaxy that might have more, there are regions of the universe that might have more, there are star clusters that might be more heavier, more rich in metals than others. Now we know this because we can measure the metal content of stars. And we know from this planetary system and other planetary system that when the protoplanetary disk, the cloud that formed the sun and the planets form, the elements were distributed similarly around. So by knowing how much metal are in the star, we know what was available to the planet while they were forming. So that's one way to think about measuring the metals in a system. Then we need a way for the metals to be available to biology. So the big role, for example, plate tectonic on this planet, but any type of tectonic, plate tectonic is only one of the instances. You know, there are multiple ways in which you have tectonic, in meaning exchanging elements and volatiles like water, CO2, gases between the surface and the interior of the planet. People have theorized and probably observed evidence of different type of tectonic. We think you need it to just recycle metals and elements over time. Let's make the example of iron on this planet. Once iron gets to the surface, can be either oxidized by oxygen or photo-oxidized by the sun, becomes rust. And if you're a microbe that needs iron too, and there's not a niche on this planet where you can cycle back oxidized iron to reduced iron, you're gonna run out sooner or later. So the big role of tectonic here is to recycle things for life. So that's why we think about, that's why we think about rocky planet with active geologies, because you need to recycle things over time. Giovanni said you need a star that is stable over a long time to allow for life to develop. But you need also to have an efficient recycling system on the planet. Otherwise, your disequilibria runs out. Your surface is always oxidized, your interior is reduced, but there's no connection between the two. you run out of energy, you run out of elements, you run out of whatever you need to sustain yourself. So that's why I was saying probably there are multiple layers there between what we measure in stars, which Giovanni is more well-versed than me to explain you better how we do that, and what type of data we have available today, because turns out, and that was another surprise for me, we have a good amount of metal data about stars laying around, and the role of geology in providing the metals to life.
Giovanni, do you want to add to that before we go to questions?
First of all, what Donato was picturing in our minds was just a picture of Mars. Mars in our solar system is, from geological point of view, is not active, is dry planet. There is not alive, not only from biological point of view, but also from geological point of view. These two things are interconnected, intertwined. So Mars is that planet, first of all, from a geological point of view. And that's, as a consequence, there is no life. So this is a very a counterexample with respect to the Earth. Unfortunately, when we observe and study exoplanets, are not able so far for the moment, maybe not even next few years, next decades, to understand if they are active or not from geological point of view. What we can do now is to measure the metal content, the chemical composition of the stars. And since stars and planets, they form together, we can infer what is the likely chemical composition, the metal content also of the rocky planets around these stars. Then we can measure the mass, the radius of these planets, and have an idea of their bulk composition. We can have an idea of how much iron, on average, is bulk these planets have. And then we can start the atmosphere using James Webb Space Telescope, for instance, to understand if there's an atmosphere that contains CO2, oxygen 2, and then it's a lot of work to do to connect all this sparse information in a global picture.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, I know that we know this, but it's worth saying, amazing what we can learn from our planet here about what are effectively dots in the sky, like in the images behind you, those paintings behind you. You have a number of stars there. There are little, that's perfect because there might be planets around those stars in your painting. And sitting where we are here, we can say something and put together a picture of what those planets or what those moons might look like. And it's, it's worth just stating again that is a tremendous triumph of technology and science. Okay, let's see if we have questions from some of our listeners. Oh yes, there are questions. So I'll take them in order, and we'll keep these answers, if you don't mind, fairly brief and concise because we want to get in as many questions as possible before we wind up at the top of the hour. Okay, are population 2 stars likely to have enough heavier elements to form rocky planets, and especially those elements necessary for complex metabolism? If so, could there be very old planets harboring life? So the question is about population 2 stars, whether or not they'd have enough of those heavier elements to form rocky planets, and then those elements necessary for complex life.
Yeah, so probably it's a question.
I think it's
like
for you.
Me.
Yes or no? No. Okay,
yes, yes. Yeah, we can. Yes, probably population 2 stars, they already had enough trace elements, enough heavy elements to form planets. So they are not the oldest generation, not the first generation of stars that appeared in the universe. They came right after, maybe in a few hundreds of million years or 1 billion years. You have started to have these population 2 stars, and probably they already have enough elements to form rocky planets. If these elements are enough also to start life, if they are above a threshold to start life as we know on Earth, well, this question is one question I would like to answer within the next few years, let's say. We start to understand what is the threshold of metal content to form planets. For life, it's harder question.
I
I don't know, maybe Donato, maybe. as
Well,
a better idea.
let's move on, just because there's probably a lot more to say about this, and I hope that the listener got at least the answer that was helpful in that. But because you bring up the timeline here, the next question has to do with that, and I'll ask this of Donato. And the question is, how early would metallicity, I hope I pronounced that correctly, I've not said that word out loud, have been sufficient for life as we know it? So how early would this
I think the metallicity of the planet as a bulk does not change after the planet has formed. So either you have it as a planet or you don't. What might change is how these metals are distributed on the planet. For example, just to make two very brief examples, after the great oxidation event, after the increase of oxygen on this planet, iron became very, very scarce on the ocean today. And primary productivity in the ocean, the bloom of algae and phytoplankton in the ocean, is often iron limited. On the other side of things, I think we have evidence to conclude that without plate tectonic, some of the metal will not have been available to life during evolution. So there's a big link there. So the total metallicity is either you have enough metal or you don't. Either you have some type of metal or you don't. How they're provided to biology through time, that's a much more complex and bigger question.
Let's get to this. There's another question here that is about, life as we know it and life as we don't know it. And that's on this idea that biology here has taken advantage of available metals in the appropriate quantities and distribution on this planet. And exobiology, biology off this planet, might succeed, this listener writes, with a somewhat different assortment of available metals. Excellent question. I mean, maybe the metals that are essential for life here might not be the metals essential for life elsewhere.
I completely agree. And the fact that we still don't know the complete list of metal used by life in this planet makes this question even more interesting and more relevant. And so far, I would just think that elements that are capable of exchanging electron could be used for this. Now, this list is pretty long. And depending on the pressure, temperature, pH condition, different metal might be used in different way. Depending on the solvent, different metal might be used in a different way. So absolutely, exobiology might be used a different set of elements to solve the same problem. Much like some people theorize that you don't need the carbon to make complex molecule, you can use silicon, for example, or other type of elements. I think what we're trying to, for extant life, we're trying to understand the role of specific metal for this planet. In general, we're trying to establish a principle by which you cannot use energy without having mediators of energy usage. Metal in this case, specific metal for this planet, but I agree, exobiology might have solved this problem with a different list of elements.
You bring up energy, and as we talk about metals, they both come together in the vicinity of hydrothermal vents. And another question here is, doesn't your hypothesis here of the role of metals, the emphasis of the role of metals in early life, really point to strengthen the argument or the hypothesis that life began in the vicinity around hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the sea?
Yes and no. We have other places in which metal are available. There are people that believe in the uranium decay, uranium-thorium decay energy as being an important source. And in the crust, there's plenty of metal. The warm little pond idea of Darwin, which we don't know how much exposed land we had at the time, but hot springs are another place. They're very similar to hydrothermal vents in a lot of ways. So for sure, hydrothermal vents are a place where a lot of metal are exchanged with the ocean, but how much metal you need is a different question. So, yes, I'm not a big fan of scenario. I think scenario are useful to think about very basic principles that advance our knowledge of biology. I'm not affectionate. I work in hydrothermal vents a lot, but I'm not a strong supporter of one scenario versus another. I think they're useful as a tool to think about things. I'm not like in one camp cheering or the other. So yes, potentially, but not only.
Yeah. Okay, so it's one of the possible roles. This next question here, you can't have a discussion of aliens without bringing up Star Trek. Do you have Star Trek there? Do you watch it?
Yeah,
have you watched it there?
Since we were a kid.
Since you were a kid, was it translated or dubbed into Italian?
Everything
well,
is
no.
translated here and down. That's why we have such an horrible English. As
Your English is great.
translated.
Okay, how do you say Star Trek in Italian?
Well,
Star
Star Trek.
Oh, you just say just when the you just say
Star Trek.
okay.
We didn't translate the title. Let's put it that way.
Okay. How would you translate it?
Well,
Passeggiate stellari.
Stella.
Sì, percorsi, cammini fra le stelle.
Sì, cammini tra le stelle, passeggiate stellari, something like that.
Okay, a little less catchy, but
Yeah.
okay, we'll work on that. Okay, so this is a question from a Star Trek fan. Said Star Trek once had an episode that featured a silicon-based life form, and you touched on this, but let's have a little bit more fun with this and emphasize it. Could silicon or any other metal play the role of carbon? And you hinted at that, or you said that, Donato, but do you both agree that you could just swap out the carbon for the silicon, or the silicon for the carbon? No, carbon for the silicon.
I don't know if I will say as easily swap carbon for silicon. I think that there's good theoretical work that suggests that you can form complex molecule using silicon. I wouldn't say that that's as easily swap one for the other. Theoretically speaking, we can play with a lot of different things and have fairly complex organic looking molecules emerge. So theoretically, yes, I will keep an open mind on that, absolutely, personally at least, but I'm not an expert and I will not put my money on silicon before carbon.
Okay, a lot of qualifications there.
Yes. After all, we start. Yeah, after all, we can not only we can start just from what we know on Earth. It's not that we don't have that nature has not enough creativity or fantasy. Maybe nature can make life elsewhere in very different ways. But we, as a scientist on Earth, we don't have enough fantasy, and we should start from what we know better.
Yeah.
After all, I mean, organic species are very, very common elsewhere in the molecular clouds in the universe. We are discovering a lot of really in heaven for biochemistry in the heavens, in the molecular clouds.
Yeah,
so
that's
really
a
likely.
good point from Giovanni.
Yeah. So we observed that chemical molecules, giant molecules, big molecules, based on carbon chemistry, are everywhere in the universe. They are easy to find on other planets, in the clouds. So I would bet that carbon-based life will be much more common. But this is just a very naive bet for me.
But it makes a good point about the distribution of carbon molecule in what we know in the molecular clouds outside our planet. So
basically, we don't know how universal is the case that we find here on Earth. If it's just a random.
We'll stick with carbon until the machines, the silicon-based life forms in the form of machines take over. One last question from audience, and then I have a final question for the two of you. And Giovanni, I think this is going to be one for you to answer, which is the role of gravitational tidal forces. No, Donato too, but the role of gravitational tidal forces in providing a substitute for the geological activity, the geological recycling.
Very good question, because we have in the solar system some small planets, actually satellites of Jupiter and Saturn, which are active just because they orbit, they go around giant planets like Jupiter, and they are stretched. The gravitational force tidal gravitational force by Jupiter stretching these small little rocky planets, and so keeps them warm, hot in their core. So for instance, we have Europa, and we know that Europa is hot inside, and we observe this ice cover of water. And so we are pretty sure that there is a large, huge ocean of water down there. And probably we will find, maybe next generation, maybe some of our young scientists in the audience, they will find it in next decades. They will find some thermal vents in Europa and answer the question that me and Donato could not answer now. I mean, are they thermal vents ideal places where life can have another chance or not. So yes, gravitational interaction is a good substitute for satellites for the geological activity.
Do you agree with that? You concur, Donato?
I think that gravitational tidal locking and gravitational tidal forces, they can make up for the lack of active geology by maintaining one. So on Earth, active geology is maintained by radioactive decay. But as far as you have forces that act on the system, yeah, sure, you can recycle things like Europa or Enceladus or Titan is doing. So probably, yes, why not? It's one of the places we are looking for signs of life at the moment.
Yeah, for sure, they are much more alive than Mars. Europa is, from geological point of view, is alive. Mars is not this moment.
Well, that leads me to the final question in some ways, and this is a thought experiment. And then after this question, we will wind up. But you can have some fun with this thought experiment. If you could travel, either of you, both of you, could travel to a moon or a planet in the solar system or outside it, in other words, anywhere you wanted to go, and actually hunt for these metals or life itself, if you could be physically present, what would be your top destination, and what instrument would you fire up or pull out of your backpack first? Top destination, and which instrument would you grab out of your backpack, assuming you bring a backpack, and use first?
That's a very good one, a very tough one. I would say personally, if we're going to a target, we probably already know there are metals and there's liquid water, and we have done our homework. Otherwise, it's going to be really expensive to get there without any previous knowledge.
Okay, so I like that this is just a thought experiment, and yet you're still qualifying it, saying, okay, we want to be very, very certain. Okay, so let's say all of those.
Well, you said thought experiment. You didn't say wild goose chase experiment, so that's why I started that way. But I would personally probably head to Enceladus at the moment.
Enceladus.
Because I think Enceladus, with probable hydrothermal activity close to its rocky center, with a thick ocean, and with possibility of recycling oxidized material from the surface of the ice, with all the groove we've seen, will be one of my top choices right now. And assuming we can dive there, which is it's going to be a fun dive. I'm used to the Alvin for diving here on this planet, so I think we're going to need a much more technological submarine to do that. We'll definitely get there, and possibly the easy one will be start to look for cell, use either a combination of biomarker microscopy and DNA to see if there's anything floating around. But I would think Enceladus as the close target would be a big one for me, a very interesting one for me.
Great answer. So Giovanni Donato would go to Enceladus and go diving, and then take a sample of that water and see what turns up in that water. And where would you go, Giovanni, and what instrument?
If we find if it happens that we find rocky planets in the next few years and around a nearby star, and we have measurement of their metal content, I would certainly go there in this rocky planet in another solar system. But to be more realistic and to choose something that we already know, I would go in solar system Titan, around Saturn. Titan. Yes, not so far away from Enceladus, in same planet, in the same system actually.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is that Titan has an atmosphere, not made by oxygen, but by methane. It's much, much colder. So you have the same cycle that you have on Earth, with water on Earth, but there you have methane, which is rains of methane, of lakes. It's wonderful because we know that there are lakes there.
Methane lakes, methane lakes, methane lakes, yes. And so it would be Titan. And we're going to wind up here in the instrument that you would pull out first.
Yeah, the same instrument that Donato will bring with them. I mean, in this case, I would play the role of a biologist. So I would be just like a bachelor student in biology there, but I would like to do another thesis on methane if I can go there. I will start again in this case.
Beautiful. Giovanni Cavone and then Donato Giovanelli, thank you so much for joining us. This was really fun to talk to both of you. And now I think I turn things... I think I turn things over to Simon now. Hi, Simon.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, a fascinating conversation. Part of my research was to study the metallicity of distant galaxies, and the idea of the universe, which of course was started in the Big Bang, as far as we can tell, which just had hydrogen, helium, and maybe a little bit of lithium. And each successive generation of stars has created and enriched the universe. And maybe there is some point in the history of the universe that the availability of metals just created this era of life. And obviously we are living in that now, and it could just be just a widespread universal phenomenon. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you again. Yes, Donato and Giovanni. Thank you, Molly, for the wonderful fielding of the questions and the discussion. Thank you especially to Jasmine, Rebecca, and Beth behind the scenes who actually make this whole thing function. We had visitors of viewers, I should say, rather than visitors, from around the world.
Visitors are what you're looking for behind you in the.
That's right. Yes, I can't even quote the visitors because that's secure information. But Rockwall, Texas, Naples in Italy, Newcastle under Lyme in England, Scotland, Fort Bragg, Maine, New Brunswick, Emilia Romagna, did I pronounce that right, in Italy, San Jose, close to us, Mexico, Croatia, Ireland, Ithaca, New York, Milton Keynes, Louisiana, and from Greece, to name just a few of the places that people have tuned in from. So thank you so much. Usually we will give you each a check for 10,000 euros, but you've decided to turn that down and instead will receive a special SETI Talks mug each that will be mailed over to you. So congratulations on that as a treasured item. Reminder that the SETI Institute is a non-profit organization. Thank you again for your donations, and please think about donating to the Institute. If you want to learn about future SETI events like SETI Talks and other outreach events we do, please do go to our website, seti.org, and we look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Ciao tutti.
Ciao, ciao.